without further ado, we're excited to welcome Mónica Guzmán and Jonathan Rauch, celebrating the publication of I Never Thought of It That Way. We're also in partnership with Braver Angels, DC, bringing Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. Our rep, Luke, is in the back today. You saw him on your way in. If you want more information, please stick around to ask Luke some questions on your way out today. So drawing from cross-partisan conversations she's had, organized or witnessed everywhere from the echo chambers on social media to the wheat fields of Oregon to raw, unfiltered fights with her own family on election night, author Mónica Guzmán shows how you can put your natural sense of wonder to work for you immediately, finding the answers you need by talking with people rather than about them, and asking the questions you want curiously. Mónica Guzmán is a journalist, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Evergrey, an award-winning newsletter and community in Seattle. She also serves as an advisor to Braver Angels, a national organization out to depolarize America, and Together Washington, an organization building collaborative local relationships among leaders in Washington state. We're also very fortunate to have moderator Jonathan Rauch with us this afternoon, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a contributing writer for The Atlantic, and the author of 8 books, most recently The Constitution of Knowledge, which again we have signed copies of. We're so fortunate to have these authors with us this afternoon. So enough from me already. Please give a warm, resounding welcome to Mónica Guzmán and Jonathan Rauch. Thank you both for being here.
And is it, yeah, masks off. All right, cool.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Politics and Prose, everyone's favorite bookstore. This is my first in-person event at a bookstore in over 2 years, and what a joyful occasion. And thank you all for coming. What our online viewers don't know is that right now in DC, it is horizontally blowing sleet outside.
So bad out there.
As W.C. Fields says in The Fatal Glass of Beer, "'Tain't fit night out for man nor beast." So thank you all for coming out. It is such a pleasure to be here with Mónica Guzmán and to have read her book, which is, as you'll see if you pick it up, it's not only full of powerful advice and good research in psychology, it reads like you're talking to your best friend in a coffee shop. Like you just want to keep going just because her voice is so vivacious and there's such a sense of liveliness and wisdom. But under the surface of this lively, personable book is possibly the most important mission in America today, bar none, which is the mission of depolarization, understanding ourselves better and each other better, learning to talk to each other, which is not the same thing as learning to agree with each other. Moni and I were both involved in Braver Angels. I was an original board member and still a friend and evangelist. And Moni's doing that work as well. So thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Let's just start at the very beginning. Who is Mónica Guzmán? And what was your own sort of Braver Angels breaking point? We all have one when we just realize we can't sit still anymore and we have to become activists.
Yeah, so I've been a journalist pretty much my whole career, and it's been very important to me, that responsibility to help people understand each other. And journalism has been a wonderful way to do that. Like Jonathan, you've been a journalist. It can be a very rewarding thing. It's a service to society. I take it seriously. And there was a point sometime in the last several years where I started to worry quite a lot about what had been building in terms of distrust in the country. Not just distrust of journalists, but distrust of Americans against Americans. And I saw that was completely undermining the ability to tell stories into this climate that could actually be heard and have an impact across different groups of people. And, I'd observed that for many years, but sort of thought, well, so, that's just the world. That's always been this way. It's fine. I'll just keep doing my thing. But then it it got so bad after the 2016 election when I would have conversations with, I'm liberal myself, with many of my fellow liberals, but I think this was happening all over the political spectrum, having conversations where I started to see the grip of certainty, that people were sure, that they knew everything there was to know about the other side. And were making judgments based on that certainty that to me just wasn't based on evidence. It was based on feeling. And so I think that just started to grow and grow in me until I finally decided, I think I might need to step outside of daily journalism to try to figure this out another way. And then there was a moment, and it was actually here at Union Market, believe it or not, the Weave Summit in 2019, where I saw these pamphlets on these chairs. It was a conference of bridge builders, and Braver Angels, what's this? I pick it up and I look at it and I'm like, people are doing this? Is this working? Is this possible? And I started volunteering with Braver Angels, but that really just brought me into a community of people who really agreed that something had to be done and that people were capable of it, that we didn't have to wait for politicians to fix it, that we don't have to wait for the media to fix it. There are some pretty toxic incentives in that whole, in both those institutions that are going to take a while to undo, but that people themselves could come together and figure this out just by talking with each other. And so, yeah, that just led me to say, all right, I'm still driven to help people understand each other, but I'm gonna do it this other way.
Just this won't be an ad for Braver Angels, but those who are interested, braverangels.org. Blues and reds in equal numbers. The idea is no one's trying to persuade anyone of anything. We're just relearning how to communicate. And people leave our workshops and debates. The most common reaction is we are not as divided as we've been led to believe, which, by the way, is true.
Yeah.
And how about this book? Why did you decide this would be your big book?
My big book, I don't know, but a book I had to write, yes.
The book you had to write.
The book I had to write. Yeah, there were a couple of threads. I talked about the journalistic thread, a feeling that if I want to continue to work to help people understand each other, then there was something else that I needed to explore and mine, and that was trying to figure out what was getting in the way of our seeing each other clearly. That's what I felt was the ultimate blocker. That, one side looks at the other, and not just across the political divide, but that's a particularly pernicious one. One side looks at the other in these polarized times, and we see some perversion of a person. We're not actually seeing each other at all. So it was sort of the realization, man, if we can't get curious across these divides in a polarized world, we can't see the world at all. We gotta do something. We gotta clean up the view, right? But really the personal reason, honestly, was my parents. And they are here tonight, by the way. They're here today. My parents and I are Mexican immigrants, and I voted for Clinton in 2016, and my parents voted for Trump, and they voted for Trump again in 2020. And we had separate politics for a long time. The interesting thing is we're Mexican immigrants, so it was in the year 2000 that we became citizens, and that was Bush-Cheney. That was also the year that I really discovered that my parents were Republicans. And I had just assumed, stupidly, that, I don't know, I'm more liberal, and I guess all immigrants should be liberal, right? That's what CNN headline news seems to think, and it's probably right. I was in high school just kind of picking up the signals that I could. But that led to, 20 years of arguments and getting into it with them about all kinds of political disagreements. But again, something happened, the election of 2016. First off, our own arguments became pretty heated. I'm looking at them for affirmation. Yes, they did. It got pretty intense, like the way I was feeling about this particular Republican candidate. Just brought everything up to a new level. But then after the election, I'm in Seattle, I'm talking with my friends, I'm going to events, and inevitably there was so much anxiety. Seattle's a very blue place. There was so much anxiety, and people would talk about the latest headline and something with Trump that obviously bothered me and bothered many people, who shared my point of view. But then inevitably the conversation would turn to the people that were ultimately to blame, which is the people who voted for Trump. And then from there, it was a very quick hop to declarations about people who voted for Trump that I realized I was taking very personally, because my parents are not these things that people are saying. And so once that became personal, and I could see something that I wished I could, I just found myself wishing that I could like transfer my knowledge of my parents to these people, who are my friends and who are very scared and anxious, and I get it. To just be like, there's more to this than what you are seeing. And we got to do something, because the way that we're talking about each other, if I play this out, this is not leading us anywhere good. So that led to, I think, what I'm coming to understand is sort of, in some ways, the heart of the book, which is that this is about people. This is about people. That's who is really ultimately powerful in our politics. That's who's powerful in our society. Yes, there are institutions, but even they bow to people. So we've got to see each other. And that was really that was a big driver.
It's about people, and the book is just rich with accounts of conversations with people, encounters with people, often surprising. But I think for me, it was the family stories and the conversations with your parents.
Yeah.
And how both intense and ultimately revelatory those were, that to me were maybe the single most memorable aspect of the book. So it's a special privilege to welcome them here tonight. So thank you for coming.
Yay!
They're here in the second row.
Yep.
Well, let's just dive into the substance a little bit, because under the surface of sort of the chatty, vivacious Moni, there's Professor Guzmán. The book is full of actually structure and research on why we're so divided and how to fix that. You have this acronym, SOS, and it doesn't mean help. What is it?
Yeah, it stands for sorting, othering, and siloing. So the three forces of human nature that, with their powers combined, have taken us to a pretty dark place. And I do point out, these are natural parts of being human. Sorting, wanting to be around people who are like us. That's how we make friends. That's how we stay comfortable. These are good things. Othering, that's how we make distance between ourselves and those we think are different. But even othering, can bond us sometimes, with those we like. It's just a factor of community and how tribes of people behave. And then there's siloing, which is the stories we tell in some ways as a result of the first two, of sorting and othering. Once we enter our silos and add some time, the holes that we're in get deeper and deeper. And when we listen to voices from outside our silos, they get more and more skewed and sort of beyond recognition. And that's where we are. It's the perfect storm. It's SOS. And it is a kind of cry for help from this polarized society. But again, it's understanding that these things are natural. They are instinctive. They have led us to some wonderful things. I mean, it's social evolution for a lot of great things that we can credit to these factors, but also some of the worst things that have ever happened in human history we can credit to these factors, othering in particular.
And when they start to interact, they can become a kind of entrapment.
Absolutely, yeah, because
it can be quite hard to get out of.
Right, because what happens is that fear increases, right? I mean, when we other the other, it becomes a lot harder to get curious about them. We can't wonder about what we think is out to get us. That's just not a thing. We think more about survival. We think more about avoiding harm. And when you do that, it does become a lot easier to see this other person as nothing more than a threat. Their opinion is a threat. They are a threat. There's no point to getting close to them. And it really has, in the course of history, that has led us astray quite often.
And this is something that not only we do to ourselves, but demagogues do this to us. All three of these mechanisms, sorting, othering, siloing, go back throughout history as ways that demagogues have manipulated society to turn people against each other and for the demagogue.
And what I think they're ultimately exploiting is everybody's need to belong, because that's what SOS is ultimately about, is we need to feel connected, we need to feel seen. That's like a jargony thing these days, like, I see you. But we do. We need to feel seen. We need to feel heard. It's just true. I don't know that it's ever not been true, and it will never not be true. So yeah, really, bad actors will exploit that, and will turn up the fear, and will turn up the certainty too about other people. And that puts us in a really scary place that it feels like we can't claw our way out of, but we can.
And then you also have some very compelling material, which I also explored in my own book, on what we've learned about the intrinsic biases that predispose us to behave this way. And that's pretty daunting material, actually, when you read it all in one place. We all think we can rely on ourselves to have a fair and accurate view of the world. Not, right?
Nope. I think we're both familiar with the work of Jonathan Haidt, and many others, social psychologists, talking about our society, the way we talk about things. We really do assume that it's all based on logic and reason. But actually, the intuition tends to lead our reason, and the reason just sort of plays catch up and tries to make up reasons to justify our actions and our gut sense of things. So sort of looking that truth in the face makes one humble about one's own ability to discern the truth around us. So, and that again is why I kind of say, nobody's immune, right? I think even, as a journalist, I sort of thought, well, I am an expert in the discipline of fact. I think that's a term that you use that I love. But I'm, an expert in the discipline of fact. I don't care how polarized society is. I'm good. None of this can touch me. That's not true. That is not true. Journalists, politicians, anyone who is in an institution that's supposed to help us come to a collective understanding of ourselves and each other is not immune to these forces.
A lot of people don't realize this. I was on a podcast with a host, and I mentioned we were talking about why people vote for Trump, and the host said, because they're stupid.
Oh, God.
And I had to stop and say, that's completely wrong, because it turns out that intelligence and education are no good at all at preventing SOSing and biasing. In fact, we took these cognitive horsepower that we develop and use that to rationalize our SOSing.
That's right. Isn't that
So
amazing?
being smart is no good at all. You have to do something else. And so this leads to what I think, to me, the big takeaway from this book, which is one of the most undervalued concepts of our time. I put it in the top two. The other would be wisdom. And these two are closely related, and that's curiosity. I pulled this quote from another interview that you gave because it says so much in just a few brief words. You said, in a polarized world, none of us sees the world truthfully unless we're intentionally and fearlessly curious. So how is curiosity the way that we can defeat all of these bad mechanisms that we're talking about?
Yeah. So among the bad mechanisms we talked about fear and certainty. And those are curiosity killers. We already talked about fear. You can't wonder about what you think is out to get you. With certainty, if you think you know, you won't think to ask. So those are the two things that are making our culture so incurious. But what's fun is once you kind of see it in the framework, you realize that curiosity is just a practice. We can choose to be curious just by asking one question, just by having one conversation we wouldn't have otherwise had, and also potentially by taking a certain posture in our own mind where we decide to hold some of our beliefs more loosely, not because we don't want to hold on to them as convictions, but so that we can let other alternatives just kind of float into our brains and actually consider them. So curiosity is it's a whole thing, but the science of curiosity is really fun, and I enjoyed doing the research on it because all it really comes down to is a craving. It's a craving for knowledge. We have all had the experience of being curious. It can be as simple and silly as sitting at a bar with friends, that guy from that movie, that guy from that movie, the guy, and someone just has to pull out the phone, fine, but it's like an itch you can't scratch without pulling out your phone. So, but the difference between curiosity and other cravings is for example, if you're thirsty, you crave water, you drink something, and then you're not thirsty. But with curiosity, as soon as your attention is taken away from the gap between what you know and what you want to know, curiosity goes away. So we can get distracted away from curiosity very, very easily and simply. But to get back to I think the spirit of your question, the reason curiosity is what we need right now is because nothing sort of busts through the walls between us more powerfully than a really perceptive question. And as a journalist, I know that from experience, I think you might too, is just questions are really hard to wiggle out of, you know? Like people are, oh, somebody needs information, and even if I don't say words or I try to dodge, my whole demeanor may already answer whatever question is coming, you know? So asking questions is such a powerful and incredible thing we can do to cross the chasms between us, to try to understand where someone else is coming from. And we can go more into that, but I'll stop there for now.
One of my favorite quotes in the book, which I think you just explained, was, "Curiosity is big and it is badass."
Yeah.
And that's an important thing to say, because you know, we typically think of curiosity as children wanting to know stuff like, you know, what is the moon made of?
Yeah.
And a central point of your book is that it's much more than that. You also said, "I say an answer won't give us what we need. What we need are more questions." And I was thinking about all this after reading your book. Why is curiosity so badass? Why should it be way higher on the list of virtues than it is, ahead of a lot of other things that we think about? And I was thinking, well, yeah, curiosity is the desire to know. But what Monty's book also clarifies is that it's also the desire to connect, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
yeah,
about,
it is.
It has to be, the way you learn is by going to others
Yeah.
who know or see something you don't. So it's not just book learning.
No, and I talk in the book about how one of the little magic mechanisms, if we can get there, and I'll bet we all have in certain situations, is when curiosity about ideas becomes curiosity about the people who hold them. That's extraordinarily powerful. That's incredible. You know, I get asked all the time, how do you have a conversation with someone who believes in a lie, you know, or like believes in something that just, well, basically I think sometimes we forget that we can get curious about people. We can get curious about how the paths that people walked to their views, that it doesn't have to be up here at the level of fact and logic and reason. And I know that sounds silly, like what? What conversation could we have if it's not at the level of fact and logic and reason? It's like, well, we can get curious about each other's stories. And, oh, well, what's that good for? It's good for a lot. You know, I think of the ethic of social media, which is the platforms on which we have so, you know, by volume, so much of our discourse and so much of our exchange of opinions seems to bring about this ethic that we are our opinion. Like, you know, raise your hand if you've gone on social media and seen somebody put their cause at the level of their name in their profile, right? Like, that's what we all do, right? We billboard that right there. I am my opinion. Who are you? You're your opinion. What's your opinion? What's your opinion on this thing? How about that thing? How about that thing? How about that and that and that? You have to have an opinion about everything. Why? Because it seems like that's our calling card now, right? And so I talk about how the internet is a non-place that makes us into non-people, because we forget we're not our opinions. Our opinions are the results of our experiences in our whole lives, you know? And another thing I talk about too, and I really feel very strongly, is that we don't see with our eyes, we see with our biographies. So when we don't get curious about people, you know, the people behind the views, we're just on the surface with these ideas. We're not understanding how we all arrived at them differently. And that's, like, a person is a bottomless mystery, a really incredible, valid, dignified mystery, right? And when we arrive at our opinions, that is an indisputable fact, the path we took. So let's dig it up. Let's figure out what it is.
My first managing editor, my first boss when I was 22 years old at my first newspaper job, used to say, everyone has a story and your job is to find it.
Yeah.
There's real depth to this notion of curiosity, which, you know, two other aphorisms, monisms, can I say? Monisms?
Monism?
That I wrote down. You don't have to know what you think about everything.
Oh, yeah.
Which reminds me, I don't know if any of you have heard of the great humorist, now retired, Calvin Trillin. He used to write humorous essays. And one of them was that he decided that he was not going to have an opinion on nuclear disarmament. And the reason he would not have an opinion is because he had to have an opinion on everything else. as a point of personal privilege, he was going to say, I am reserving this as the thing that I never have to have an opinion on.
Wow. And what a rebellious act.
And what a rebellious act.
Yeah.
But the notion, you also say, we don't choose our opinions,
Right.
and that gets to what you're saying a moment ago, which is if you want to know why someone believes what they believe, you have to know who they are, because they're not sitting around just choosing it at the spur of the moment, right? You have to connect at the individual level.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And that leads to one of the central tactics, I suppose, strategies in a conversation, because all this has to come down to, yes, but what do I say? What do I ask? How do I even begin? And one of the things I talk about is the difference between why and how. So when you ask somebody why they believe what they believe, you're at the level of reasons. Makes sense, great. And often when there's a lot of trust, in a debate type of scenario, trading reasons is really fun and can be really illuminating and really great. But in a time of mistrust and across lines of division and suspicion, asking why can make people feel pretty defensive. I'm on the stand now. This is a trial, right? So I better protect myself. I better defend myself. And that's where we go to sort of the press secretary in our minds, to use Jonathan Haidt's formulation, and okay, how do I defend and explain what I believe, right? But when you ask people instead, how did you come to believe what you believe? In a climate of distrust, that's a lot less threatening. That's a lot less aggressive. And again, we don't mean to be aggressive when we ask why. It's a perfectly innocent question. It's about the climate we ask it in. But how did you come to believe what you believe is you ask the person to give you a tour, not to stand trial. And when they give you a tour through your story, you will, first of all, it's almost inevitable. No matter what their opinion, you'll probably find something you relate to. They'll tell you about their struggles, their pain, where they're torn on something because of something that's happened to them. I mean, these are incredibly illuminating lessons. But yeah, it's just, it changes the conversation into one that could build trust. Because you get to know each other.
And there's a lot of good research on this. People ask me all the time, and I'm sure they do you too. People are very worried about the surprisingly large number of Americans who believe in crazy stuff like QAnon. Mm-hmm. And they ask all the time, so what do you do with someone who believes conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton is running a sex trafficking ring in concert with international Jewry? How do you approach this? And the research suggests that confronting them with facts fails because these narratives meet a need in people's lives.
Exactly.
So, but what does work is coming kind of alongside them, asking why, what's going on here, showing genuine curiosity, and that can open people up. There's a wonderful quote that was attributed to Dale Carnegie, which is, you can't make people agree with you, but you can make them want to agree with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And I see a lot of that reflected in your book. Let me ask you a question that you may or may not have heard, but Braver Angels gets it all the time, which is, what about people who don't want to be part of what you're suggesting? They don't want to have these conversations, and they have moral objections to that. They think just engaging with someone who thinks that Hillary Clinton is running an international baby killing ring is not something that they can honor and platform by having a conversation about. They would say that in that sense, curiosity becomes a form of complicity. What would you say to someone who says, this is beyond the pale, Moni?
Yeah, and I mean, I would begin by agreeing that the ways in which our senses of reality across society have diverged is certainly more concerning than it's ever been in my lifetime, and I think maybe even in yours. It's pretty bad out there. So to the extent that we have moral concerns and a lot of anxiety about the infection of a particularly pernicious untruth, right? We're afraid to touch it. It could be like COVID. It'll spread. We don't want to be the spreaders. What if we make it worse? It's already so bad. So the first thing is just, I get it. I share that concern. But you mentioned the word platform, and I do hear that concern a lot. I'd be platforming something if I give it voice. And here's what I find kind of funny about that. We speak about conversation as if the only conversations we can have are on social media, as if the only conversations we can have are the public ones, where platforming is a concern. So to me, the thing that eliminates that concern should be one-to-one conversations. there's a whole host of things we can talk about with the responsibility of information, right? And making sure that sure. If there's something really dubious, maybe, okay, try not to help it spread. As a journalist, I have feelings and thoughts about this, but we can go into that. But in a one-to-one conversation, you have containment. I talk in the book about containment being such an important condition of a curious conversation. A lot of our conversations are not contained to the people actually participating in them. There is an invisible, large audience none of us knows, and we hardly ever stop to think how freaking weird it is to talk and have no idea who's listening or what they think. I mean, wow, right? That's odd. We've made it normal. Well, have the one-to-one conversation, and the only thing that you can be afraid will get infected is you. So, if that's the concern, and there's still fear, I get it, but what I would say is this. I think that people are afraid that because it seems like we see ideas infect others and turn them into these monsters, amoral things, that's something we have in our head. Again, I might be wrong about this, but this is what plays out in my mind. That because we think that dynamic is possible, we also then come to believe it's possible with us. That if I have a conversation with someone who believes a conspiracy theory, I might hear something that makes me believe it too. Oh, no. In the course of that conversation, I might get infected. And to me, you said we don't choose our opinions. We don't choose our opinions. It's not like, my husband loves Star Wars and saw all the prequels with his dad 3 times each in the theater. It doesn't matter how much I talk to him about how much better Star Trek is, he's not going to change his mind.
But you're right.
That's not a thing.
You are right.
Thank you.
Of course you're right.
I mean,
She's
yeah.
right?
I'm definitely right.
Yeah, everyone's saying right.
But I'm just saying,
They know.
no amount of talking to my husband is going to change my mind.
By the way, we're talking original series Star Trek, right?
No, Next Generation.
Ooh.
Oh. And a disagreement is created.
The wall comes down.
This conversation will never be the same. But anyway, we don't choose our opinions. He can't just decide to like Star Trek more. There's a lifetime of experiences and love that has led to his love for Star Wars. And there's a lifetime of experiences and values that lead people to their ideological flavors, right? So again, do we really think that in the course of one conversation, some idea that we find completely unsavory and terrible and horrible is going to actually infect us? Really? Why do we have such little faith in our own Constitution?
We're the sense that we're in some way honoring this viewpoint by talking about it. That we should just say, look, you're reprehensible, your view is reprehensible, I won't engage with this. That's also a natural human impulse.
That's right, yeah.
Your book is trying to get us to approach what we are naturally somewhat inclined to avoid.
Right.
Haidt talks about the most primitive of all biological instincts is the decision approach or avoid, which even a bacterium will make. And there's so many incentives to avoid, but one of the marvelous things about your book is that it is full of practical advice. Some of it's kind of counterintuitive, like you're not the big transparency fan that a lot of people are. You point out the ways in which the dynamics of public argument can be very flawed. But what are some of the ways, we can't go through them all because the book is so rich, but what are some of the ways in which you recommend why and how to approach these conversations? Some of the tips, the pro tips.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not the first one to say this one, but it is extremely important if you're really interested in having a curious conversation with someone who disagrees with you, not to come in with the all-encompassing, all-consuming intention to change their mind. I mean, that's not just not workable, it's also almost impossible. There's a lot of mic drop moments on social media, People drop a meme and they're like, yeah. Everyone who sees this is gonna get it just the way I do. No, they're not. But because we don't see the impact, we kind of tell ourselves that, here's the reason, I'm holding it in my hand. This is the reason that convinced me of this one thing. Well, all I have to do is share that reason. And that's it, And so we have this idea that that's all it takes. But that's just not how we work for the reasons we just talked about. Our opinions are the result of our whole experiences. So again, coming in expecting to change someone's mind is just not practical. It's just not practical. So that's one thing. Another thing is, and this one's particularly tough, I think there's courage in patience. I get a lot of folks saying something to the effect of, hey, I tried, okay? Like, I sat down with my cousin or my grandpa or whatever and my friend, and I asked him a lot of questions. I was curious, and like an hour went by, an hour and a half. He talked at me the whole time. He never asked me questions about me. And that's it. I'm done. You know, that's it. I'm not going to have another conversation with him. I'm going to burn that bridge down. We're done. And again, it comes back to that thing where like, that's us going to another person, again, a deep mystery, and expecting them to join us in conversation on our terms. If you're truly curious, then you should hopefully try to be open to whatever terms are real for them. It could be that when you start asking them questions, they are so surprised and sort of relieved that you want to listen that they're going to talk at you a long time because you haven't listened yet, maybe. Or they just they don't feel heard somehow by society, and so you're the doppelganger for I'm going to talk at you. Does that mean that they're incapable of curiosity? Does that mean that they're not going to join you in a conversation, that you can't actually learn from each other? No. It does mean that you're going to need some patience. So those are two like big approaches. And then sort of, some smaller things. One is just our own beliefs. So we talked about certainty. Polarized times really make us want to find answers. Whatever answer is close by is the best one. Why? Because I'm scared. Boom. I'll take this one, this one, this one. I've got my shopping cart of answers. I'm sure of everything. And I get to live like, a smoother life. But I give the analogy of smartphones. Many smartphones have something called wiggle mode, where if you want to move your apps around or delete them, what you do is you press on them and then hold them down, and then they all start wiggling in place. I think this is like Android and iOS and a few others. And that's your cue to like, oh, I can take this one out, I can move this one out. That's how I think of holding our beliefs and our convictions when we are in a curious conversation with someone who disagrees with us. Again, you still hold the beliefs, but you let them shake a little bit so that you are actually capable of seeing things in a different way. And that approach, it's just a little mental trick, and it may seem, I don't know, kind of weird. It works. But yeah, I can go into more, but that's good.
That's a marvelous analogy. I love that, though my phone doesn't wiggle. But I try to. So I think it's time to engage each other.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Are we reading cards or just calling directly on people?
Cards when you're here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you have time for about one more question to look through those before we go to audience Q&A. If anyone has no card, make sure that I see it. Will come.
So I'm supposed to ask you a question to keep you busy while I look through all of these cards.
Let's just be transparent about that. I like that. Ooh,
And yet another, wow, you guys are really engaged.
Good,
Thank
you're
you.
curious, yay! It begins.
More tips. I'm going to ask if you have any more tips
Okay,
while I read these cards.
great. Okay, another good one, since we've talked a lot about opinions, is the way that we tend to express our opinions is with a lot of confidence and certainty. And I think the ethic around that is, well, if you don't say, well, this is this, then your opinion is not strong. And I would question that utterly. I think that the best way to express an opinion is to express it as a snapshot of what's in your mind right now. So that's how I try to do it, and it works very nicely. I've seen others do it. The behavior is modeled, and it changes your conversation. Right now, with what's going on with abortion, here's what's in my head. Boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom. Language like that situates an opinion as, again, a result of where you are right now. First of all, it keeps you as a person in the equation. And secondly, it sets the tone in the conversation that our opinions can move and can shift and can breathe and have different aspects to them that we can explore. It's almost like, taking the hallways of your mind with all the closed doors and just opening them all. Just opening them, making sure that there's some breeze that can go through, right, when you're talking with someone else. That way you can actually impact each other. And again, not change each other's minds, but give each other different perspectives on the things we think we already know. That's really, really cool. And I've really enjoyed that. Another thing that's really important, this last one, because it looks like you might be ready. Another thing that's really important is being clear about people's meaning. This is something we often skip. Right now, a result of our different shared realities that are happening is different shared languages. Shared realities become the foundations for completely different languages. What does that mean? That it gets continually harder and harder for these two worlds to meet, because the word nationalist over here means something and the word nationalist over here means something else. And so that means that when you talk, you actually have to slow down as you approach what might be charged terms. You have to flag for the other person. Here's what I mean by racist. I don't know what you mean, but maybe let's slow down and define that for each other. Otherwise, you could amp yourselves up and get the conversation, get heated, but without cooking anything, much sooner, because frankly, you're not clear about each other's meaning. It's important to remember words are our best tool to convey meaning, but they are not our meaning. You know, the goal is to get to our meaning. Okay.
Well, we have enough to talk for another hour here, which we're not going to do, but, oh, interesting, we got one about science, but they kind of group, which is nice. They're two together, which I think we just addressed, but I'm going to read them anyway just because they so well state the concern that we were talking about earlier, and I hear it all the time. But they're both versions of how do you engage with someone who is just saying something that is immoral or terrible. One person says, we're witnessing an authoritarian in Putin running roughshod over another country, so on the one hand, I completely agree with your approach. On another, I worry that it may make it impossible to recognize and oppose malicious figures in politics. How do we balance the competing impulses? I think you addressed that earlier, but it's very well stated. And it's a very valid concern. Another is very similar. Where do you draw the line between empathizing with those who disagree with you and not allowing too much, quotes, airtime for rhetoric that's truly hateful and harmful? And this is a dilemma. But just to push you on a point on this just briefly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I understand you as pretty radical on this point, that there's pretty much no one, if they're willing to talk to you in good faith, that you would not be willing to talk to regardless of their viewpoint. And I'm guessing that would include a racist.
That is correct for me.
You would?
Yeah. And as a journalist, I've always considered sort of part of my job description to go into uncomfortable conversations, you know, that others may not feel ready to do. So
but your book is also kind of making that part of the human description as well.
Yeah.
It's saying we have a...
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that journalists are capable of anything that humans aren't capable of. You know what I mean? Like, we're not uniquely, you know what I mean? We don't have superpowers. We just practice.
I spent years, many years, in the gay marriage debate making a case for that. And one of the effects that had was constantly, day in and day out, talking to people who held the position I was a second-class citizen and should not be able to ever marry anyone, much less my husband, who's here in this group right now. And of course, we didn't have the luxury of saying, we won't talk to you about this because you should agree with me because I'm right. But I also found it mind-expanding to have those conversations, and it made me much more effective as an advocate, to understand what people of good faith had in mind when they opposed this. No, not the crazy people, not the bigots. They're much fewer than you would think. So here's another pair that fit closely together. They're both concise. The first is, this feels impossible. How? And the second says...
I hear that. I get that.
The second one says, to put the more sort of positive version of the same question, how hopeful are you that we'll become a less polarized society in the U.S.?
Ah, boy.
So, are you completely naive about chances of actual success here?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, first off, I'll be honest, where I do sometimes feel naive is in the face of institutions and forces where, it's like one human, one person, I think is so accessible and so powerful. Lots of humans. Lots of humans all moving in lockstep. Oh my, right? There's no way to have the conversation with all of them at the same time. You got to build the trust one by one by one by one by one by one by one, and that is what feels impossible. But here's where it's totally doable in my head. Is is, again, to me, it's not just that we shouldn't wait for the politicians and the media to fix this. It's that they can't. They can't. Those institutions respond to us. You know, we are afraid of culture. We are a culture. We're afraid of ourselves. Let's just be honest about it. So to me, the practice of curiosity, first of all, I know that it sounds really daunting. I know that put all together, it's like, you know, what the picture in people's minds is, you want me to talk to a Nazi tomorrow? No, I don't want you to talk to a Nazi tomorrow. What? Like, you know, we just go straight to the scariest thing and say, like, we can't do that. Well, fine. That's not the point. You know, it's more like curiosity is a practice that you apply to wherever the heck you are. You know, if this is your circle and you just want to spread it out this much, then do that. You know, just the one more question, asking people about their concerns. Just, you know, there's a lot of tips in the book. But that is what ultimately gives me hope, is scale. You know, if enough, I really think that if, like, tomorrow, everyone, if they're any kind of interaction across disagreement, they all decide, for example, at the moment where they want to jump in with their own opinion, to ask one more question, to unpack the other person's, the entire world would be like 2 clicks more curious, and we would see things about each other that would bring the volume down, that would make us less afraid, even a little, right? And then if everyone does it again the next day, and the next day, that's what gives me hope.
One more question.
Yeah.
I'm now going to really show my age, but can we call that the Colombo doctrine?
Okay, I do love Columbo.
One more question.
One more thing.
One more thing.
And he's always like, one more thing. God, I love Columbo.
I'm showing my age there, but Colombo is back.
Yeah.
So we have a few interesting suggestions here. By the way, I need to congratulate you guys on your very legible handwriting, and also the person who just delivered a card with a question on it, and it's marked at the bottom, low priority question.
How humble of you.
That is so kind.
That's
I mean,
adorable.
you know that the psychology is, of course I'm going to look at that one first, because someone was so considerate as to say that, but instead of going right there,
That's great.
someone suggests, instead of trying to convince people to, quote, switch sides, maybe we should talk about politics issue by issue so people can detach from all or nothing belief systems built into party politics.
Oh, yeah. I do love that suggestion. That is something that Braver Angels does with our debates. Again, this should not be a commercial for Braver Angels, but if you ever do get to check out a Braver Angels debate, it's pretty remarkable how the structure allows us to do just that.
And breaking stuff up into smaller chunks. This turns out to be good. Surveys find that on actual issues, people disagree much less than they think they disagree. Like by a factor of 2, right?
Oh,
I think you have
nuts.
this material in your book.
Yeah.
And on issues like gun control and immigration, if you sit people down in a structured way and show them that, that's actually depolarizing, just to know that on this issue, wait a minute, we've been had. We're not so far apart.
Exactly. And we really have been had. I want to emphasize that. We have.
We have. Polarization is in the interest of a lot of people in politics and media. They profit from it.
They do.
Politically and personally.
Yep, and we're emotionally addicted to
And
some of the effects of it. And it's going to be hard to
Here's
untangle,
one.
but we can do it.
This is asking for your single best piece of advice for anyone who wants to see it the other way, get in someone else's head. But I think you've been there. Do you have anything to add on that?
What is the single best piece of advice? One that I haven't mentioned that I do think is incredibly powerful is instead of asking after people's opinion on something, ask what concerns them about something, right? So why are you pro-choice or something? Why are you pro-life? Around the issue of abortion, what ultimately concerns you when it comes to society, when it comes to women, when it comes to babies? Where are your concerns? What comes up for you? What are you afraid of? And actually, a brighter, optimistic way to ask essentially the same question is, what do you hope for? And this thing about gun rights and gun regulation, what do you ultimately hope for? Where do you think that we should be able to get? And watch them sort of spell out a vision that there might be some values in there that you relate to and you get into their head.
That's lovely. Here are two that are slightly in tension with each other because they both have to do with the concept of compromise, which is close to my heart. The Constitution is a compromise-forcing mechanism.
Yeah,
that's what it does.
That's
it's
right.
an elaborate structure to make us compromise. And the Constitution of Knowledge forces persuasion instead of coercion. But this is really hard to do. So these two are kind of in tension. The first says people seem to grumble when legislation passes that doesn't perfectly match a party agenda, but forget that compromise is a huge part of the process. How can we be grateful for small steps forward while still holding legislators accountable for voting against national values? And the second, which is slightly in contrast with that, says how do you reconcile a desire to have open, curious conversations with people who are so fixed in their stances, especially when these stances are overtly homophobic or racist? It's hard for me to feel it is fair to meet them halfway. Meet them halfway, interesting phrase. When A, they won't come the other half of the way toward me, and B, it pertains to groups' rights to even exist, to have life, liberty, and happiness. I feel unable to give up my hard stance on certain topics.
Oh, yeah.
So compromise, I mean, curiosity, compromise, what's the relationship there? And what do we give up by meeting someone? Do we have to meet someone halfway?
Yeah, I definitely question that framework because, we hear that a lot, that there's a line right there, and I'm here, and this is it. That's a very two-dimensional way of looking at it. I don't think that's it at all. I think that it's more realistic to say that there's a three-dimensional kind of thing that you don't see. So first of all, when you say, when they'll never come to reach me or what have you, do you know that? How can you be sure? Do you absolutely know that's true? So introduce uncertainty into your sense that you could predict what someone else is going to do. But at the same time, you actually have to let go of any sense that you can control what that other person is going to do. If you enter a conversation with expectations about the other person's behavior, you've kind of already lost. And that does take humility, and I do want to acknowledge, that person's talking about, what if your opinion, right? It's not just an opinion; it's an identity. It's who I am, right? Like I hear folks say, like, how do I talk to someone who thinks I shouldn't exist? I've even seen on social media the most extreme form of this. How do I talk to someone who wants me dead? And that one is really like, wow, it's so hard to answer that in any way. But one thing I would say is like, and just to take the extreme as an example, how do I talk to someone who wants me dead? What an incredible assumption to make about what someone else wants to do to you. They want you dead. How do you know that? Do you know that? Is it just a couple of people? Is it the whole group of people? Are you taking this and spreading it to all these people? I mean, that let me just try this. And I know this is tricky, but like to live a life thinking that a whole group of people wants you dead. I mean, my goodness. If it's true, then all right. But is it true? Do we know that? And another thing I'll say is this. The book it's got eyes on the cover because ultimately this is about seeing people. In a polarized time, we do not see people clearly. We just don't. We're going to need to get curious and ask our own questions to be able to do that. But if the answer for every single person in a group that feels marginalized, it's okay if it's the answer for many. This is a personal choice. I can't tell anyone to do anything. But if the answer for every single person in a marginalized group is, I will not approach folks who disagree about something that affects me personally this deeply, then what you're also saying is, I won't give them the opportunity to see me. And if every member of that group says, I will not give anyone the opportunity to see me, I don't know how that leads anywhere good.
We're about out of time, but I will say I talked to many, many people who did not think that I should ever be able to marry anyone, and including people who thought that homosexuals should be put in jail, which, by the way, we were until the Supreme Court struck that down as recently, sodomy laws as recently as 2003. I never met anyone who wanted me dead. What I met were people who had wrong ideas that they had been brought up with, that they were misinformed, but they were almost always trying to do what was right for what they thought God or country wanted them to do. And I found I could reach them. I just always did.
Yeah. But again, I want to emphasize, and I say this in the book, I go out of my way to say it, this is not about everyone needs to do, no, we are all in our different places. And all it is just push the limit a little bit wherever you are. That's enough. We don't all have to talk to Nazis tomorrow. We clear? We clear on that? Good. Okay.
Well, I think we have a hard stop at 4, and we have some more questions that we didn't get to. I apologize for that. Someone very helpfully sent up a question that was with an asterisk, medium priority question. I truly apologize that there are 4 you didn't get to, including low priority and medium priority. But Moni is a very accessible person, as you'll see today. And I'm going to volunteer you, now or in the future, to communicate with all and sundry, especially those who buy and read this marvelous and important book.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you. That was awesome.